All right, my name's Cameron Magee. Welcome to Live Labs in June. Got a couple of lessons for you today. I'm going to jump right in on the first one. And that one is going to be called Cable Matters. There's a pun there. My jokes are pretty terrible, so that's as good as it's going to get. So that was supposed to be funny. Okay. It's not going to get any better than that. So Cable Matters. Hashtag Cable Mat. So much in production, we focus on the gear, right? We focus on what's that light, and what's the mixer, and what's the speakers. But in my experience, I've been doing production for 15 years. There's a lot more cable at an event than there is anything else. And when I think about how much time I spend setting up for an event as a sound guy, I spend a lot more time on cable than anything else. Whenever you say, hey, I want to get started in production, what's a couple of things that I should learn? You pretty much learn over-under. You learn how to roll a cable. And you say, if you can over-under, you can probably keep busy on an entire loadout, which is true. And so I wanted to detour from all of the gear and kind of the nerdy technical stuff for a minute and just spend a whole block of time as our first lesson at Live Labs today literally talking about cable. If I could teach production people one thing, whether it's an intern or somebody starting out or even someone who's been doing this for 30 years who's driving me crazy, it would be power and signal. Power and signal, okay? Power and signal truly make up the basic of all shows, okay? So no matter what it is, I don't care if it's a lighting show, we got to get power to all the lights, we got to get signal to all the lights so they know what they're doing. If it's just a sound show, if it's just like a band in the park, we got to get power to all the stuff, we got to get signal to it. So if you walk in any show and you're like, I don't know what to do, pretty much you could look around and be like, well, what's the gear? And I should get power and signal to each set of gear, okay? So we're going to go through it in that order for a reason, because I believe it should be power, then signal. Power's the foundation. I mean, nothing's going to turn on without it. So power first, then signal, okay? So we're going to talk about the basics of power and then the basics of signal. So who can tell me, this is a power strip, nothing fancy here, no tricks, it's not like a gun or something. It's just a power strip. I'm going to plug this into that outlet over there on the wall, for instance. Who can tell me how much juice can I get out of that outlet, whether it's here or at your house or wherever? What's the measure of power which I can pull from something? 110. 110, and what is that? Like what's the 110 what? Volts. Yep. I hear 110 all the time. 110 volts. Yeah, 110 volts. Great. What are some other numbers? There's different numbers. 120. 120 volts. Yep. 115, 110, 120. You can pull 220. You can pull 208. If we were in another country, those numbers vary heavily. So, but there's another number that is the measure of how much juice you can pull out of an outlet. The amps, and it's 20.
Give or take.
Yes. The amps, and it is 20, okay? Now, the reason those two numbers matter is voltage is how much, voltage is how much juice something needs, but everything in this country, for the most part, needs 120 volts to function, okay? That's a pretty standard thing. But the amps are different. For instance, this computer needs less power to run a little laptop than this does. They both run on 120 volts, but this needs about 3 amps, and this needs about half an amp, okay, roughly. So my question is, if I plug this power strip into that outlet, how much juice can I get out of that outlet?
You get 15 amps, but you have to split it up with that.
Okay. Yep, okay, I'll detour for there for a second. In residential, the 20 amp standard, 20 amp out of an outlet, becomes a 15 amp standard. So in my house, an outlet, I can get 15 amps out of it. But if I'm in a commercial building, it's 20 amps. And how you know that is an outlet, everybody knows, looks kind of like this, right? It's like Mickey Mouse. In commercial applications, it adds that little dash. And the dash is for pulling 20 amps out. So in my house, I don't have the dash. But here at a commercial building, I do. Okay. So if I'm pulling juice out of that outlet over there, I can get 20 amps, and that's it. Now, can anyone tell me what happens if I try to pull 21 amps out of that outlet?
No, throw a breaker.
You're going to throw a breaker, okay? So let's talk about what a breaker is. So if I'm pulling juice out of that thing, and I don't know why I keep saying juice, if I'm pulling electricity out of an outlet, and I just keep plugging stuff in, right? So it's like, it's Christmas, it's cold, the power didn't go out, but the fire won't start. So I'm plugging in space heaters like crazy. At some point, I'm going to throw a breaker, okay? That's because we're trying to get too much power out of the outlet. And so at a certain point, we're going to burn the building down because we are trying to pull too much electricity through a very skinny wire. The wires that feed those outlets are very skinny, okay? So the purpose of a breaker is to keep those wires from melting and burning the house down. Something on the other end of the house throws. It says, hey, you're trying to pull too much. It's almost like, I don't know if we had like a garden hose and we were trying to like put like a fire hose down it, like fire hose amount of water down a garden hose. It's almost like a valve or something on the start of that like if you try to put too much, the valve just breaks, and that way you don't ruin your hose or something. So instead of burning your house down, a breaker will flip on the other side of the house because you're trying to pull too much. So you have 20 amp outlet, you plug in 1,000 space heaters, it will go for a second, and then that breaker will trip. You go turn the breaker back on, the outlet's fine again, everything's cool. If we didn't have the breaker, if that outlet just tied into the power pole out there, the power pole can generate 600 amps, easy. So it'd be like, sweet, space heaters, let's do this. 600 amps fits down that wire outside your house real well, and then when it makes its way to that skinny wire, the building's going to burn down. So 20 amps, and the 20 amp circuit is your friend. 20 amp circuit's your friend all day, every day. No matter what this gear, there's some big gear in here. There's some gear that requires a ton of juice. Like, for instance, your dryer in your home, right? Everybody knows the dryer plug is huge. Dryer needs 50 amps, okay? So it doesn't work on a 20 amp receptacle because the breaker would throw if you like somehow Jimmy rigged it. But everything else in your house turns into that, right? I mean, every other thing imaginable turns into that. In the same way, in this warehouse and in production, there's a couple dryers. There's a couple big items that are going to need 50 amps. But for the most part, I mean, darn near everything wants that. Even if it's a specialty like lighting connector or something, it's going to end up wanting this, okay? So keeping that in mind, it's important that you understand what's happening kind of under the hood with power. So if the 20 amp receptacle is your friend, how do we get to a 20 amp receptacle? Okay. So power comes into a building. Like let's say we're setting up in like a little hotel room. It's going to be like a cocktail reception with a jazz band, but instead of a jazz band, it's going to be like a death metal, like knockdown drag out, like a lot of juice, because the jazz band wouldn't really work in this application. So it's going to be like a metal show, but like going hard in the paint, but it's in like a hotel ballroom. Okay, so we walk in and we're like, we're going to need a lot of power for this because the guitar amps are loud. We got to have bright lights. They want strobes. We got a hazer going. At some point, the guy's going to elevate out of the stage, so that elevator takes some juice. We got a lot of crap, okay? We could run around the room and start plugging stuff into the outlets, but eventually we're going to need more juice, okay? So we've been in these ballrooms before. Before we had what's called a power distro, which is where we're going next, we would need to gather all this power. So we would say, okay, great, grab a 100-footer, and I just plugged in right here, so this wall's probably full already because they usually put multiple outlets on a breaker. So like grab me a 100-footer, run it into like the catering kitchen, and like come out here and drop it, and we'll use that. Well, that's how I did Dean Al's in South Arkansas for years. I would literally take 200 feet of power, go down the hall, go in the catering kitchen, then take 200 feet and run it in the pastor's office. And I would get enough circuits back to the youth room that's like a retrofitted barn so that I could run my show, okay? Well, that doesn't work forever because eventually you can't like Wile E. Coyote your thing to get, you can't get enough stuff together. So you need more outlets. So how do you get more outlets? Well, we need more outlets because we need more electricity, because we need more than 20 amps. But let's say, before we go on to needing more outlets, let's say we had a bunch of stuff, okay, that we need to get plugged in. Like let's say we had all these lights, since they're all here. We had all these lights, we had this speaker, and let's say that each one of these lights draws 3 amps, okay? 3, 6, 9, 12, well, forget it. Let's say they all draw 8 amps. 8, 16, 24, 32, okay? You've just learned if we plug those 4 into this and plug it into the outlet, the breaker's going to pop, so that's not going to work. Okay. So we need to split those up so we can do some basic math. So we've got 816, okay, that's an outlet. 2432, which is basically 816 again, that's an outlet, no problem. But what happens if we need to get more juice than those 2 outlets? That's when we're going to drop in a power distro. Okay? If you think about what happens in your house, power comes in from Hoover Dam or wherever it's coming from. It comes in on this big, fat, thick cable. And it hits your little breaker panel in your house. That should look familiar, okay? And then from there, there's receptacles all over your house, right? There's these little square things. They're fed through conduit out to there, okay? Does everyone understand kind of what's happening here? We've got 200 amps of juice coming in, and then these little baby breakers, these 20 amp breakers are saying, okay, that's 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120 amps broken out of the 20 amp main line. Are we tracking there? Okay. Typically, there's a gigantic breaker right here as well that says if you try to pull more than 200 amps, I'm going to pop too. Because technically, in an average house, they're going to put like 100 outlets, okay? Well, if all 100 outlets actually drew 20 amps, we'd be trying to pull 1,000 amps, which is a problem. So maybe if all 100 outlets pulled 19 amps, for instance, none of their breakers are going to pop, but the overall breaker is going to pop to prevent us from melting this cable and burning the street down, okay? So this is what's happening inside the walls of this convention center or this barn that I'm doing sound at for a D-Now weekend. This is what's happening, okay? If we're like, okay, we need more than 6 outlets, we can't use this, what we bring in is a power distro, which is this exact same thing in a portable form, okay? So, well, here, that's not going to work. In this hotel application, they have a really beefy panel, okay? Because they needed a bunch of outlets. So they put in the regular panel, and then they put in a more panel. So they put in all these panels where they just keep adding outlets and outlets. This goes to the hotel rooms. This goes to the kitchen. This goes here. This goes there. Well, because this is like let's say this is like an 800 amp main line, okay? Well, what they can do is they can add another panel after adding all those, as long as they're not pulling more than 800 amps. And all it has in it is one big fat breaker. It does not have a bunch of little baby 20 amp breakers. It has a big fat, let's call it a 100 amp, or let's do a 200 amp. It's just a giant 200 amp breaker. Just like the main breaker to get out of the building is 800 amps, this one is 200. But instead of going out to all these receptacles like these have, this is just sitting there. It's not doing anything. If you take that faceplate off, because production is a very dangerous industry, if you take this faceplate off, back there you can see what's happening. This panel is being fed by a big fat cable, and I drew 5 lines to kind of represent. It's one big fat cable, but it has 5 connectors in it, just like a power outlet. I mean, that's one outlet, but you see it has 3 pins. Just like an XLR has 3 pins for a microphone or whatever. Power, in this case, has 5 pins coming into it. And we're not going to go over that. DeVore went over that last month. Has 5 things coming into it, and it feeds this giant 200 amp switch, but then it just sits there. What we do is we take the panel off, and we take bare copper, and we come back out of the bottom of this thing with those 5 things. So this one breaker feeds our 5. But these 5 are different. I want to make sure this is clear. These 5 just kind of make up a big fat cable. That's different than like these 6. Like this is a self-contained circuit that I drew. So this is like 3 wires. Is this tracking? Okay. So 3 wires made up this outlet. This one, there are 5 big fat ones that make up this one. I'll detour for a second. This is kind of what DeVore went over, but those are, in an average outlet, we have hot, neutral, and ground, okay? In a big fat one, we have hot, neutral, and ground, and then we have hot, hot. We have more hots. And what that is on an outlet, all the juice comes down this pin. This pin is all the power, okay? The power you don't need, because it's going to give you 20 amps because it's capable of giving it to you. The power that you don't need is going to be dumped back down the neutral, okay? So it's like I'm sending you enough juice, and then it makes a loop to go back. And then the ground is, in some event, if lightning struck or something crazy happened, there was this huge surge, it will dump the excess power back out the ground, okay? So hot, neutral, ground. But all 20 amps come down this one pin. Well, in the big boy scale, when it feeds into the building, 3 hots come in. Hot, 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 neutral, ground, okay? And that's coming all the way down to here. We got 5. So those 5 cables are what's going to feed our distro, which we rolled in. These used to look really ghetto back in the 70s when people first started using them, because all it was just this electrical panel in like a wood box, okay? Because that's what it was. It was an electrical panel that they took out, they bought from Home Depot, shoved it in a case, and instead of putting it in the wall and the city feeding it, you would feed it with this temporary cable that we call feeder. You would feed it with the feeder, and then you'd put a bunch of receptacles on one side of it and then go out from there. That's all a distro is. A distro is this, okay? So if you're on a show and you're like, hey, push the distro over there, the distro is a portable breaker panel of sorts, okay? Fed by a main line, just like this is fed by a main line, and then it can distribute out whatever circuits we want, okay? So it starts at the panel, which I described as here. This is the panel we're going to tie into. And then it goes through feeder, and it hits the distro, okay? So now we basically have what we started with in our house, which is the panel. But we've got to turn it into all of these outlets. So from there, we're going to run cables. But let's say that on an average show, like here, let's say we'll do this big show real quick. So let's say that the panel that we tied into was over here like in this corner, okay? And then let's say we ran like 100 feet of feeder, and our portable distro is going to make it to right here, okay? Well, up here on the truss, we need, let's say, 6 circuits. Well, if the distro is back here and we need 6 circuits up there, we're going to have to take 6 extension cables, loom them together, and run all 6, like 300 feet, from back here, over, up, out to the truss to plug them in, okay? That's crazy to run that many cables. So just like in audio, how there are snakes, if you're going to run multiple lines, in power, there are kind of snakes, if you will. That's kind of a dangerous thing to call them, but there are snakes. And what those are, in our world here at avad3, are SOCA and L2130. SOCA and L2130, okay? And all those are basically snakes or trunks of getting more juice somewhere, okay? It would be like if we're like, hey, all 3 of these outlets are on the same side of the building, like if we're building a hotel, let's just run like one big cable all together, and then we'll kind of fan it out at the last minute. That's what we're doing. We're saying, hey, let's put this distro backstage over there, but we'll run a trunk of cables, and then when it gets here, we'll fan it out. That's what SOCA and L2130 allow us to do, okay? I'm going to pull up a picture on the internet to show you what these connectors look like. At least I think I am. So here, oh, thank you. Here is an example of a power distro, okay? This that we're seeing here is the same thing I sketched out over here. The main part of the power comes in the bottom on these 5 connectors, okay? So that's the 5 that I talked about. From left to right, that is ground, neutral, hot, hot, hot. And you plug them in that order for safety purposes. You plug in the ground so that no matter what happens from here, we can get back to the dirt. Neutral, so what happens from here, we're covered. And then hot, 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 okay? That feeds this distro. And then this particular distro on the internet gives us 6 L2130 outlets, which are these giant white things that are then basically snakes that can feed little boxes like this, where we take the big white connector in, and then it spits out outlets that make sense to us, okay? Does all that make sense thus far? If you've had an experience in audio, it'd be just like if we were going to patch a drum, like a drum set, and it's like, let's not run a bunch of XLRs over here. Let's drop an 8-channel snake, and then we'll plug everything in. That's all we're talking about with power. If you look back over here at the drawing, that's all we're talking about, to just kind of equate it from audio back to power. We're saying, hey, there's going to be 6 circuits on the truss. Let's run a snake out there. And we use 2 types of snakes here. We use SOCA and L2130. L2130 is the white one that looks like this. SOCA is a black one. There's some differences. You can Google that. I'm going to skip. I don't want to take our time going over the differences of which one's which. Okay, back to this. And we are back. I'm going to barely touch on something while we're here, just for like safety's sake or protocol or something. So we talked about there are 5 lines that feed a panel or our distro. Ground, neutral, hot, hot, hot. It's kind of important, that you balance your load across those 3 hots. You do not want to pull all your power coming off of the first hot, and then the second and third aren't really there. Because those 3 work like a peace sign, and they kind of balance each other out. And so if you put all the weight on one end, it's going to kind of be a problem. It's not that big a deal on a small scale, but if we're doing this metal show in this ballroom, and we plug the hazer and all the lights and all the PA and everything into one hot, it's going to start to get weird. So you want to think about on your math and distribute those. Now you might be asking yourself, well, how do I pick which hot I'm on? Every one of these outlets, as we drew, needs a neutral and a ground. They're all going to share the same mother neutral and ground that come in the king neutral and ground. It's the 3 hots that we split up, and we put like this is leg 1, this is leg 2, and this is leg 3. And then we're just going to repeat this again. This is leg 1, this is leg 2, this is leg 3. Those are color coordinated. You saw in the distro when we pulled it up. They are black, red, and blue, and that just represents the 3 phases. So on your distro, on your little lunchbox breakout box that you drop behind the drums, whatever, you want to be cognizant of. You don't just want to say, okay, we filled up the first blue one, we filled up the second blue one, we're done back here. We didn't need all these outlets. You want to fill up the first blue one, fill up the next one, which would be red, and if you don't have anything else to plug in, as you're walking to the other side of the stage, you're going to plug in some subs or something, be like, let's put these on black. It's not the end of the world, because on most of our shows today, it's 2017 to timestamp this, most of our shows today, we're not pulling more than about maybe 30 to 60 amps per leg. That's not going to stop anything. Where this really matters is if you're building a factory and you put all the sewing machines on one leg, and that factory collectively is pulling 800 amps off one leg, it's going to get weird. But I say that just to kind of side note for a second. It's technically proper, and I would hate for you to say, yeah, I listened to your power talk at avad3, and I'm grooving away, and I'd be like, well, you kind of want to balance that out a little bit. It's not the end of the world, don't overthink it, but you want to balance it out. Once we've gone through all this, we've gone from the circuit that comes off the grid into the building, into our power distro, SOCA, L2130, we look up, and we're back at our old friend again. We have gotten ourselves more outlets, which is good. We had to go through a lot to get there. We had to tie into this panel, L2130, SOCA, but we have more of these, okay? The last thing I want to touch on before we switch from power to signal is this concept of plugging power strips into power strips into power strips into power strips. So I have a bunch over there, but I'm not going to walk over there. What happens if I plug this into the wall, plug another power strip into that, plug another power strip into that, plug another power strip into that, and I plug like a lamp into each one? Is there any problem with that? It's not a trap. There's no problem. There's a conception, there's like a misconception that's like, oh man, that's dangerous. You've got 14 power strips plugged into each other. Technically it's dangerous, I guess, because if you like stepped on the third one, you would lose. It's kind of dangerous because you're relying a lot on this little plastic button that somebody made on the other side of the world. So that's a little dangerous, but as far as actual like danger of like you're pulling way too much to those power strips, if you got 4 lamps plugged into power strips 3, 7, 9, and 17, no problem. No problem. Because we're pulling 0.8 amps for our 4 lamps that we got, okay? In the same way, if we plug this one power strip in and we plug a space heater into that, and a space heater into that, and a space heater into that, we have a huge problem. There's this misconception for some reason that it's like, if you plug 14 power strips in, you got a problem. But like, I'm just filling up the first power strip, man, I'm just trying to be efficient. It's like, well, you just blew the circuit because you're pulling too much juice. I want to make sure we're really clear on that. In the same way, power strips on power strips kind of translates to the same thing as power con loops. So I'll walk over here, Joe. If you look at this light, it gets power through this blue, it's called power con connector, okay? So you just plug a cable into there, and then the other end of it is just a regular Edison, like our old friend. You plug it in, okay? So that's fine. Well, most things that have power con have a power con loop out. You can loop out and keep going. So if we got 4 of these lights, we plug the first one in, we can loop out to lights 2, 3, and 4. They'll all come back out of that same cable. Let's say each one of these pulls 2 amps. We're pulling 8 amps back through a connector who can handle 20 amps. We're cool, right? If we keep going and we plug like 13 of them in, it won't work. But we're pulling 8 by looping them. In the same way, if we decided not to loop them and we said, hey, instead of plugging 1 in, drop me a power strip and I'm going to plug all 4 in separate for whatever reason. Maybe we forgot the looping cables, we just have the regular cables. We're still pulling 8 amps. We're pulling it through a power strip or we're pulling it through the loop. But what matters is we've added up 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. We have 8, we're okay. I want to make sure that's really clear on power, that that's all that matters. This thing pulls 3 amps. I can put 6 of these on a circuit, we're okay. Whether this had power con and I looped them, or we power stripped it, or whatever, we had a power strip over there, and then we randomly ran like 6 extension cords out of it and plugged them in. We are pulling 18 amps on a 20 amp circuit, and we are bueno. That's what matters, okay? This is going to matter later today when we talk about designing a room. It's very important that we understand pretty much all I care about you knowing on power is how many amps does that thing pull? So therefore, how many things can I plug into this strip? It would be a waste if we ran all these outlets and you plugged 1 light into that, and 1 light into that, and 1 light into that, and so on and so forth. And we looked up and we didn't have enough outlets to plug the hazer in for the band because we've used every outlet. So you want to stuff them in, okay? That's it for power. I'm going to switch to signal flow. Does everyone feel like they've got a good grip on what matters for power? It's 1 number, and that's amps. 20 amps is the limit. Stuff it. Fit as many in there as you can, okay? That's what a power distro is. That's what we're distributing, etc. Now that we've got this hypothetical show, and we've got the lights powered up, we've got the speakers powered up, we've got this powered up and that powered up, we've got to get signal to everything, okay? So no matter what you're doing, whether it's lighting, video, audio, it doesn't matter, signal flow starts with the source. Flow as in it has a direction, okay? So for instance, if I was holding a handheld microphone and we were going to run a cable, it's going to flow out of the mic and into something. And the reason I kind of harp on this is a lot of times people grab a cable and they start running it. You don't have to run it in the direction. Like if you happen to be over there, it could be convenient to run it backwards. But you've got to be thinking when you're doing signal flow in the direction of how is this working its way through the room? That's how you think when you do power. You plug a power strip in and you trust that it's going to work. You don't like think that this is going to generate power. You know that the wall generates power. Well, in the same way, we need to think something over here generates power, something over here generates signal. That's the source. And we need to feed this, which is the destination, okay? I typically, when I was starting out, always started with the source, even if it meant walking to the other side of the stage unnecessarily, because it helped me think, I'm coming out of the mic, I'm going into the snake goes to the console comes out, goes back to the snake, goes to the speaker, I did it. The console has power, the speaker has power, the microphone had power, if it was a wireless, I did it, we're good, okay? Last thing I'll say on this bullet point is cables have genders. You will hate yourself if, I'm sure we all have, I did when I was starting out, I'm sure we all have. You run the cable 300 feet, you get there and you realize you ran it the wrong way. So it's important to kind of note the gender. Not to get too health class on you, but the gender is pretty easy. It's a female or a male. The male has something to give. So if you're starting with the source, it's probably going to be a male because it's giving something to the female. Great? Good? Enough on that. So that's an audio thing, because I believe out of the 3 departments, audio is superior. So if you're just remembering that, yes. If you're remembering that, just remember the male has the gift, okay? Even power, which we're just stringing together, has a signal flow to it. We're going to start at the light. We're going to plug it into a power strip. Then we're going to run that power strip over here to this lunchbox thing. We're going to plug it in. That lunchbox comes over to the distro. That's how it gets power. It goes to the feeder, and off we go. So whenever you're running stuff, and again, the whole point of this lesson is that cable matters and signal flow matters. It has a flow. Run it in order. You will not regret it. There's nothing worse than like saying, okay, I got to get all these cables plugged in, and you like plug this one in, you plug that one in, you plug this one in, you think, I'm good, and you walk away and you realize you skipped one, and then you didn't loop out of that one, and you're screwed. So get them all power, get them all signal, and relax. Like I said, run it from the source. That's a literal direction. I already covered that. So let's talk about kind of the 3 departments and how you might think about this, okay? And before we go to each department, we're going to talk about the difference between a source and a destination using a switcher. Out of the 3 departments, clearly audio is the best. However, video does have a point going for itself in that they use the terms source and destination. Source and destination. In audio, we call that input, output. Input and output gets a little confusing when you start plugging stuff into a switcher, coming out of the switcher, going into the recorder, coming out of the recorder, going back into a computer. It gets weird. So you call it a source and a destination. A source has something to give. A destination is looking to receive. So I'm going to use that verbiage of source and destination across the three departments. Audio, we have a microphone and we have a stage rack. Which is the source, which is the destination? Mic is the source, okay? So the mic is the source. It gets to the stage rack. It runs through the snake. It arrives at the console. The console is a destination because we went from the mic to the console. Cool. Now, we need to get to the speakers. So we're going to come out of the console. So the console is it's now a source. It was a destination 2 seconds ago, and that was also correct. But now it's a source, okay? So source the microphone to the console. Out of the console, now it was a source. We're headed to the speaker. The speaker is going to be a okay? And let's say that speaker, let's say it's like 2 wedges on a stage, and it's like the lead guy, and so he's going to get the same thing again. So we're going to daisy chain. So the first speaker was a destination, and now it just became a source again, and then we're going to go to another destination. That source destination mindset and just running it in order will literally get you like a B+ in pretty much any running that you're doing. Where you get confused is you're like, I'm already here, so I'll run this one. I'll go run that one. You run it backwards, and then everything just completely falls apart. Your whole world's collapsing. So in audio, it's a mic to the stage rack, and then to the console to the mains. So that's sources and destinations. In video, for instance, we're going to come out of a camera, and I just gave you the hint because we're coming out. That's the source. We're going to go to the switcher. The switcher is now a destination. We're going to come out of the switcher. Now that's a source. We're going to land to the projector. That's a destination. So because signal flow has a flow, we're going to run them in that order. We're going to know when we're done. Because we've reached, like let's say we did 2 projectors, a couple TVs or something like that. We've reached the last destination. We must be done. I'll clock myself out. Thanks. I know I'm good. I'll leave. You know you're good because you've done all the sources. You've done all the destinations. And I like to do them in that order. I like to say I'm going to do all the sources, and then I'm going to do all the destinations. Because I know I fed this everything at once. The audio guy can sit there and play with it or whatever, dial it in, and I'm going to feed all his destinations for him. In lighting, are the lights giving something or needing something? They're giving light. They're getting what? They're getting signal. Okay? None of these are trick questions. In fact, if you shout it out and it's the wrong answer, we're not going to shoot you. So don't worry. It's like you can chime in at whatever speed you like. The thing on lights is we've got power. We fed them power, but they don't know what to do. They don't know when to come on. They don't know when to go off. So we've got to feed them signal. Okay, where's that signal going to come from? The lighting console. Great. So lighting is the simplest of all, in my opinion, which is convenient, considering most lighting guys I know, because you just come out of the console and you land at the lights and we're done. Audio was a trick, right? Audio, we went to the console and then we came back out. Video was a trap. We went to the switcher. We came back out. Lighting is like, okay, we're good, okay? That is signal flow. These two things, the left and the right arm of justice, will help you no matter how far along you get, whether you, like I've met guys who mix acts that are like a big deal guy. But maybe when he started out, he got like a break, and so he started mixing way early. He never really learned the fundamentals. And like we'll be in a show and something will go wrong, and he will just freak out. He'll be like, he's like going through the menu. And I'm like, it's not gonna be in the menu, dude. Like we lost signal from one mic. Like it ain't gonna be in the menu. Let's go chase it down. Let's find the signal. Or like, I'm not getting that speaker. All the lines are there, I don't see what could happen. Well, it could be power. You know, these two arms will serve you really well, whether you end up being the guy mixing Maroon 5, for instance, or you're just still a hand 20 years from now. You just like to do hand stuff on the weekends. Power and signal are the foundations of everything. Last thing I'm going to cover, since we're talking about cables, is kind of a dessert, if you will, is this is how I roll, all right? We've all learned over-under. So you'd think I wouldn't go over this, but I keep seeing mistakes. And I keep seeing, no matter if I'm with like dude who's on tour or whatever, or if I'm just like with somebody starting out or whatever, you don't want to ever get cocky and be like, oh, I've got it figured out. You always want to be open-minded. I had been rolling cable. I started rolling when I was 12. I've been rolling cable, I think I was 21. I've been rolling for 9 years. I was on a show, and this guy was like, hey, you're doing it wrong. And I was like, I'm all ears. Who are you? Where did you come from? He was from a different city. And I was like, well, maybe up north, the toilets go the other way. What are you talking about? And he's like, well, no, it matters. Here's the deal. Because he's like, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it left-handed. And I said, okay. I was told you could do it either way. He said, you can do it either way. But what matters is clockwise. So it doesn't matter if you roll right-handed or left-handed as long as you always roll clockwise, okay? We all know over-under. We can do this in our sleep. Sometimes when people are starting out, they keep getting tripped up on the under. It's like a visual like paradox or something. It trips your mind. In my opinion, it's all on the wrist. You can just spin the old wrist. It goes behind itself, and then you just pull up until you know that you're at the right where you're ready to hang, and you're hanging. But something I thought about a year ago was I was having to teach a lot of people over-under really fast. And so we made a video, and it was great. And we put it on YouTube, and it was great. But then I was like, no, I got to be able to teach people over-under in like 1 second. And so what I started doing was I started saying flip the wrist. So the first one everybody gets, okay? The second time, instead of doing this, which always for some reason people freak out, I said, well, look, if you grab the cable this way the first time, just grab the cable the other way the next time. And when you bring your hand up, it'll fix itself. You just bring your hand up and it's already there. So I just kind of wanted to note that. You guys know how to over-under, but if you're teaching a volunteer or something like that, they grab the cable this way, they grab the cable that way. They grab the cable this way, they grab the cable that way, okay? My next point is it's all on the wrist. Not just because of how I roll with the wrist, but I'm saying literally it's on the wrist. So if we come here, we have a problem. Does everybody see why this is a problem? We're not there. That's not going to fix itself by punching as hard as you can. That's going to fix itself in the wrist. We have to roll the cable. We can make it do exactly what we want by rolling it. In the same way, if we can roll it the other way. I'm just spinning this cable, and it'll do that. And that's the whole beauty and the point of over-under, as we all know. After you've over-undered it 8 times, we're straight. If you over, you guys know this, you start to have a problem. Not only is there a problem on that end, now you got a problem on this end because you've overed, so you got a real mess. But I'm going to drop this by unrolling it in my wrist because I didn't let go of this end and that end's been on the ground. It's no magic trick. We're back to neutral. Second last thing, I'll talk about size matters. So you want to, if you're rolling, this is a 50-foot XLR, okay? 50-foot XLR. You know how much you're going to hate your life I mean, this is going to look like a kolache in a minute. You know, like this is nuts, okay? So you want to kind of ask yourself when you grab a cable, like how long is this thing? Like what am I getting myself into? You want to roll it accordingly. So that's going to get weird. In the same way, if this was a 10-footer and you were like, all right, I'm done. You know, like it would be over. You know, so you want to think about, you know, what am I doing? This is a 50-footer. That looks about right. I'm going to do that all day. Great, okay? Last thing I want to talk about, and this will require a little bit of camera work, Joe, and maybe a little bit of hernia work, is you don't have to roll cables in your hands. You can roll them on the ground. I've seen people like doing a 300-foot SDI. It gets heavy, right? Here, I'll do the 300-foot. It's a pretty beefy guy, you know? You're going to hate yourself by the time you're done trying to over-under this thing. Furthermore, sometimes these SDIs, because it's a solid core wire, by the way, that's why these suck. Every other cable is a stranded core. It's like taking hair and braiding it, and then like braided hair is flexible. This is like taking a piece of pipe. It's just really thin. Okay, that's why it sucks. You're going to really struggle to do this whole thing with one hand, in my opinion, because at certain points, it's going to get kinky. All right, it's going to get weird. So if it's a big old cable, I like to do it on the ground. So let's say that I'm going to roll this guy up. Let's say he was on a show and he's backstage or whatever. Try to ignore that that's rolled. And let's just do like, we'll just pretend like it's unrolled or something. I'll do it right here, Joe, sorry. Sending you for a trip there. I'll do it here. So we can roll this on the ground. Now, I usually start by rolling it in my hand because it helps me get the sizing right. I'm like, all right, we got a 300-foot SDI. I'll be right here. But after a few minutes of holding this guy, I'm going to start to get irritated, and so I'm going to take it to the ground. I want to show you a couple of quick tips, maybe things that you haven't thought of on when you're rolling stuff on the ground. You want to stay clockwise. That's important. But by going on the ground, you get two hands now. So you can have this hand doing the twisting, your left hand doing the twist to make it happen. This hand's pulling the rest of the cable. So we got one hand twisting, one hand pulling the rest over and over and over, okay, or over and under and over and under. One thing I'll say about rolling on the ground is it's awkward to keep leaning over the cable and like pulling. Like if you notice, it feels like I'm on a pirate ship because I'm like, oh. So what's better is when you get out on the ground, put the cable coming off if you're like right-handed or if you're left-handed, it doesn't matter as long as you're rolling clockwise. Have it come in like this, and then as you're over under, you're just pulling, kink. You're just pulling what you're doing anyways. It's way more natural to reach behind you. It's all in the wrist. It's way more natural for just to come from behind you like this and to feed it. Does that make sense? This is especially helpful if you get assigned to the 100-foot like feeder run that's like stout. You do not want to hold that thing. It's going to be awful. It's also really helpful on big rock and roll shows if you get assigned to like the 300-foot front of house snake that's actually a loom that you don't even roll it on the ground. You literally roll it into a case. This is how you're going to roll it into a case. Just my luck. On your right side or on your left side if you're left-handed, still over under all day. That's it for over under, which is my last point on the fact that cable matters. No matter how big you get or how small you stay, cable will always matter. Always do power and signal. Always do power first. Remember, signal flow has a flow. Go in the order of the flow. And I think that's it for me.